Today, we're taking a look at the 10 best Cinderella runs in NCAA history. First, let's set the criteria. There are a lot of underdog stories, so to properly categorize a Cinderella team, I'm more heavily weighting schools that are mid-majors. There are some great lower-seeded power conference schools to make a run, but to cut the list down to 10, I feel like for the spirit of a Cinderella, small schools fit the bill better. Also, I'm limiting it to 8 seeds or lower, which cuts some popular teams, including the famous 6-seeded NC State team in 1983, who had as good of a story as anybody. I have to set the criteria somewhere though, and it's hard to cut a list like this down to 10 without setting some strict parameters. So with all that, let's not waste any more time and get right into it. 10, Florida Gulf Coast 2023. Arguably the most fun of any Cinderella team I've ever watched. Usually Cinderella teams look outmatched talent-wise, but manage to sneak by through a great shooting game or a poor offensive night from the more favored team, or they just played exceptional hard-nosed defense and were able to shut down teams that were, all intents and purposes, more talented than them. Florida Gulf Coast was different. In their 2 games that they won, they looked legitimately like the better team. Exceptional athleticism, obvious by the Dunk City moniker, high-level movement and playmaking, and they just look the part. Why are they not higher? Well, mainly due to the fact that they only made the Sweet 16. All the other teams on this list, with the exception of one, made a deeper run. The Sweet 16 is an incredible feat for a 15 seed, but not unprecedented anymore, as another 15 seed, to be discussed later, made a run of their own, and a more impressive one at that. That all being said, Florida Gulf Coast still rightfully deserves this spot in the top 10 for the fun and competitive play they provided that year. Number 9, Davidson 2008. Steph Curry, it's really that simple. Davidson wasn't necessarily a one-man show, as Curry's teammate Jason Richards put up a nice 12 points and 8 assists per game. But other than that, it was all Curry, and what an impressive run it was. Now, looking back in hindsight, we shouldn't be all that shocked that one of the 10 best players in the history of basketball was able to carry a team that was likely below average without him to an Elite 8 and only a 2-point loss to a team that eventually won it all and had 7 NBA players on their roster. But that doesn't make it any less impressive. In the first round against Gonzaga, Davidson was down by 11 at the half. Curry then proceeded to go absolutely insane, dropping 30 of his 40 points in the second half. It wasn't just the scoring, it was the way he scored. He ushered in the 3-point era, and he started it at Davidson. After winning that Gonzaga game, they then faced a 2-seeded Georgetown team, a team that had Roy Hibbert and Greg Monroe in the paint, and Davidson falls behind by 17. Most teams fold here. Curry dropped 30, Davidson forced 20 turnovers, and they win by 4. Then they proceed to drop 33 on one of the best defenses in the country, Wisconsin, and suddenly 10 seed was 1 game away from the Final Four. Now, like I said, they eventually lost to the aforementioned Kansas team, but if they pulled that game off, they could have went and won it all, and that would leave them substantially higher on this list if that were the case. Number 8, UNBC 2018. Honorable mention to Fairleigh Dickinson, but UNBC did it first, and that counts for something. Plus, they absolutely crushed Virginia. One of the more shocking moments in NCAA history was this win. I think that anyone who remembers watching this game still had the feeling that a 1 couldn't lose to a 16. The tournament had been around for decades, and it just hadn't happened. I remember people saying it just wasn't possible. There was too big of a gap between talent levels. Watching this game live, I still remember thinking, Virginia will come back. 16 seeds had hung around in the first half before, but usually they'd lose it in the second half. They'd fall apart. The 1 seed would get things back on track. Then the second half started, and instead of Virginia pulling away, UNBC pulled away. Just an incredible performance. Now, I don't have them higher because their run stopped after 1 round, but the biggest single game shock in March Madness history surely deserves a spot on this list. Number 7, Loyola Chicago 2018. Loyola Chicago starts a group of teams in the 7-6-5 range that don't have a lot separating them. All 3 are 11 seeds, all 3 made the Final Four. The Ramblers had a well-rounded but fun offense that ran through big man Cameron Krutwig, and of course had March legend Sister Jean on their side. A lot of close games on their path before finally falling to a really solid Michigan squad. My reason for having them on the lower end of these teams in this range here is simply because their path to the Final Four was the easiest out of these next 3 teams. There was an abundance of upsets on their end of the bracket, and the highest seed they had to face on their path was 3-seeded Tennessee. Still very impressive, of course, and that's why they're on here, but the other teams above them had slightly more impressive runs. Number 6, VCU 2011. When we talk about the first four and the impact of the play-in games, the 2011 VCU Rams are the gold standard. Shaka Smart brought a havoc defensive style that absolutely terrorized teams, and honestly, they needed every bit of that just to get into the bracket. People forget that VCU was a controversial at-large selection anyway. Many analysts on the selection show were genuinely upset that they got in over some power conference schools. But, they started off their run in the first four by dismantling USC and just kept going from there. They didn't just win, they dominated some of the biggest names in the sport. They blew out a 6-seeded Georgetown team by 18. Then they did the same to a 3-seeded Purdue by 18 points as well. By the time they reached the Elite Eight to face the number 1 overall seed Kansas, a team that was loaded with talent, most people thought the dream was over, but then VCU's pressure, timely shot making from Jamie Skeen and Brandon Roselle sent the Jayhawks home. The reason that they're here in this 6th spot is because, number 1, they played more talented teams on their road, and they also played an extra game in that first 4. So for that reason, I have VCU ranked above Loyola Chicago overall all-time as a Cinderella story. But again, both incredible teams. I just think VCU slots a little bit higher because of the teams they played on their way to the Final Four. Number 5, George Mason, 2006. Yes, I consider George Mason to have the best 11-seed run to the Final Four ever, for a couple of reasons too. Number 1, it was historic. The last 11 seed to make a run to the Final Four before them was LSU all the way back in 1986, 20 years between the two, and even then LSU was a major conference school. George Mason, for all intents and purposes, was a small school doing something that hadn't really been seen up until that point. Additionally, the narrative before the tournament was that they shouldn't have gotten in as an at-large, kind of the same as VCU. They did, and even though they suspended one of their best players for a game after a low blow in the conference tournament game that they lost, they still won the first NCAA tournament game versus 6-seed Michigan State, got their best player back, and went on to beat the previous year's champion in North Carolina, a really solid Wichita State team, and then the number 1 overall team in UConn. Just an incredible run and set the tone for other 11 seeds to make that run in the future, like VCU and Loyola Chicago. Number 4, Loyola Marymount, 1990. Loyola Marymount didn't quite make it as far as the 3 11 seeds that I just covered, falling in the Elite 8. They lost around earlier, so why do I have them higher? Quite simple, none of the other teams had arguably their best player, a guy averaging 30 points per game, and Hank Gathers, actually die 2 weeks before the March Madness tournament on the court during their conference tournament. Even so, they managed to rally the roster around their other star, Bo Kimball, and even with such a shock, not just to the emotional framework on the roster, but also the system that was built around Gathers taking a ton of shots, they banded together, beating 3 straight really good teams in New Mexico State, the defending champ Michigan, and Alabama before running into an absolute force that was the eventual champion UNLV in the Elite Eight. The win versus Michigan was particularly notable as they put up the NCAA tournament record 149 points in regulation, no overtime. So yes, though they didn't make it as far as the other 11 seeds, what they had to overcome in the death of their teammate, and not just a teammate, but undoubtedly one of the 2 key stars on their roster, is insanely remarkable, and in my eyes deserves to be celebrated as one of the best Cinderella runs in history. Number 3, Butler 2010-2011. Yes, this is technically 2 years and technically 2 different teams, one with Gordon Hayward and one without, but Butler of 2011 can't be mentioned without Butler of 2010. Brad Stevens turned this team into something incredible. Yes, they were a 5 seed in 2010, so this is somewhat stretching my definition, but that 5 seed team is a critical part of the story that brought them back to the national championship game as an 8 seed without Gordon Hayward the very next year. Back-to-back national championship appearances from the Horizon League is quite simply unprecedented. When Hayward left for the NBA, people thought Butler would slide back into being a good but not great Horizon League team after one season. Instead, the 2011 squad, this time as an 8 seed, proved that the system Brad Stevens built was bigger than any one player. They weren't the most athletic team, they weren't the best shooting team, but they found a way every game in and game out. They became the first team to make the finals in 2 consecutive years as a 5 seed or lower, and though they didn't finish the job either time, it was an amazing example of how the right coach can make things happen, even in a program that is not necessarily set up to have great success. Number 2, Villanova 1985. While admittedly the biggest program on this list, Villanova's run in 1985 was iconic. Still to this day, the lowest seed to ever win it all. The reason they aren't number 1 is even though they are the only team to truly finish the job and actually win the whole thing, you have to weigh the fact that they are an 8 seed against the fact that they were a major conference program that had made the Elite 8 4 times from 1978 to 1985. They were by no means a mid-major program. However, the historical significance of being an 8 seed and winning it all versus a ton of talented teams in a row and beating a Ewing-led Georgetown team to the finals absolutely earns them a spot here, and a high one too. Number 1, St. Peter's 2022. The St. Peter's run to this day is just absolutely unbelievable. They broke the model of what people expected 15 seeds to be able to do. Historically, even after some small schools had made runs like the aforementioned George Mason, the idea before St. Peter's was generally that, 1 to 4 seeds win most of the championships, 5 to 8s can make a run, and they can pull it off on extremely rare occasions. 9 to 12s can make a push into the later rounds sometimes, but never really win it all. And anyone 13 or lower is on a dream run if they make it to the Sweet 16. Winning 1 game is a big deal for any of them, but 15s and 16s especially. Winning 2 was a historical event, only seen in the case of Florida Gulf Coast. St. Peter's broke the mold. They started off beating a number 2 seed Kentucky led by Oscar Tshiebwe, following that up by making the Sweet 16 and beating Murray State. Then, when everyone thought, they've hit their ceiling, they're done, they went and they beat a Zach Edey-led Purdue and made the Elite 8. A crazy run and rightfully considered one of the best runs ever. There was really no explanation or reason why they could make a run like this, and they did it anyway. It's a close debate, but in my eyes, when you look at a school whose entire athletic department operating budget was less than the salary of John Calipari in the year they beat Kentucky, then they proved that it wasn't a fluke and did it 2 more times in the most impressive March Madness Cinderella run of all time, in my eyes, even considering all the other great candidates out there. So with all that, that'll conclude this video. Thanks to everyone for watching. I really appreciate all the support and following that you guys give. So with all that, be sure to like and subscribe. If you have any interest in any of my other videos, I do a lot of NBA scouting reports when the NBA draft season is coming up. I also do a lot of top 10 lists like this one you see here. So if that interests you, go ahead and give a like, go ahead and subscribe. But anyway, like I said, that'll be it. Thanks for watching. Hey, thanks again for watching this video. If you enjoyed what you just saw, click on one of these videos here to see more.